Okay, I'm chairing this. I'm Andy Churchill from Network for Europe. We've been involved in European funding, ESF and ERDF for, well, I've been involved for about the last 30 odd years or so. At a local level around Liverpool, around the Northwest, and nationally and transnationally. So I'm looking back to what we had before and wondering what's going to come next. We've got 3 speakers coming up, 5 minutes each. I'm going to introduce those in a second or two. After that, it's going to be questions. I'm hoping you've got good questions. The session is primarily about the Community Renewal Fund, our experience of it and where we're up to on that. From my side, it was a combination of being very rushed and very delayed almost at the same time. I think we had a problem with the algorithm, but we can all come to that. But since this program was put together, we haven't yet seen the prospectus for the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, but we have had the pre-launch guidance beginning of February with a lot of information in that. So my guess is we're going to be spending some of the time looking at where we're up to with Community Renewal Fund and lessons from that. And part of it also examining what may happen when we get the full Shared Prosperity Fund, particularly if this rumoured delay for several years before anything around people and employment and training is allowed to happen. My hope is that can be changed, but I'm sure we can talk about that. So if you want to ask questions, you can start piling them up now if you want. Put that in the chat. First speaker is Michelle Dawson. I'm tempted to say a word from our sponsors. She's clearly heavily involved in the whole programme on this, masses of experience, and she's Managing Director of Community Services. So over to you, Michelle.
Thanks very much, Andy, and thanks very much for joining this breakout session. So I am the Director of Housing and Community Investment now for ABRI. ABRI are a housing association with around 35,000 properties in the south of England. So we span from Windsor right across into South Somerset, so quite an expansive amount of local authorities, around 35 local authorities that we're present in. I'm going to just talk briefly around our experiences with the Community Renewal Fund, what we're involved in, what that's looking like for us, and then really looking towards the UKSPF fund, what that means to us at ABRI, and some of our sort of key focuses as we prepare for more details on how that fund will look. So my role in ABRI is quite unique in terms of my team look after all aspects of housing, from how we allocate, how we work with our customers to sustain their tenancies, how we manage different incidents, right through to the community investment. So there's real complementary services that we see, and we take a very sort of customer-centric people approach, but also a very localized approach, which is very much a part and parcel of our commitment in terms of our community strategy. So, and this really does fit into kind of where we see things going in terms of UKSPF and our role in levelling up as a housing association. So we took the decision in terms of the CRF project not to actively bid ourselves as a housing association, partly due to the timescales and the work that would be involved in that, and where we were at that time, responding to a pandemic and our services, which we completely put to digital during the pandemic. And kept everything going, but really tried to position ourselves in terms of our delivery track record and working with local authorities and trying to understand what they were going to bid for. And that saw us in terms of kind of, and again, aligned to our community strategy, where we're focusing down on 8 community investment zones based on our research of where our customers are really facing the most disadvantaged disproportionately out of our entire sort of stock areas and communities that we operate in. Those 8 community investment zones mean that we really look to focus and build our relationships with local authorities, community partners, all of the stakeholders that sit around an area. So that was our approach when we looked at CRF, the decision not to actually go for it ourselves, but to work with and understand local authorities. What we saw, quite interestingly, obviously some of the drawbacks were the timescales, getting to know about when projects would actually, what projects had won, etc. But getting involved in those and then positioning what we did in terms of delivery. We've been involved with a project in South Somerset, which is around lifting barriers to employment. So again, utilising what our expertise is in terms of understanding our customers and families, and our own employment support that we deliver at Abry, to support the local authority in a research project to look at what some of those barriers are, focused on that social mobility, but also to offer some outreach support as part of that project. In Portsmouth, we were approached post an organisation being given some funding from CRF, from the council, which is around business support. So again, that went on our track record in terms of delivery of an existing project that we're involved in, called Create, which is about self-employment. So we were approached by the organisation that had won the funding, so that we were able to then join up our existing project to that. So I think that's really a good example of, us as an organisation that delivers, aligning what projects were already in place and utilising our expertise. Our experience of, as I stated, our experience of CRF, I think there's definitely some, I think obviously there are drawbacks about how quickly people had to sort of come together, the differences in terms of getting the timescales, in terms of getting the funding agreed and which project was going to start and mobilise. Whilst there are, I think drawbacks in that, I also think there are some strengths in that, because it does allow you to kind of focus down, pump prime some ideas and mobilise quickly. And we just spent, just come off the back of a year and a half of having to move our business and be very, very agile and adapt our community strategy based on what we were seeing as a result of the pandemic. So in a way, those short timescales, whilst they're complicated and to get everyone around, actually an ability to be agile and to get things working, I don't necessarily think is always a bad thing. I think the delays in starting weren't helpful, but once we were sort of primed and ready, we've got going. But I do feel the pilots, in terms of what is it going to bring back and being able to measure the sort of that impact, I'll be interested to see how that learning will be taken forward into developing the different strands sort of as we go forward with UKSPF. I think the strength in our experience of CRF for us was around the fact that we don't have a one-size-fits-all approach at Abry. As I mentioned, we're in vastly different types of communities. So, and South Somerset wasn't an area that we would necessarily see lots of funding going into. So that was a great opportunity to work with that area and deliver something and be working in partnership. Looking towards UKSPF, I would say where we're positioning ourselves as Abry is we're working with communities that work and other housing providers, looking at how we can begin to position the housing sector in terms of the fund, and really outlining our unique role, because I very much see us that we're about people, we're about place, we also deliver. So within the whole ecosystem, there are some real opportunities for the housing sector to play that unique role and to help with those, to help with how pilots and how projects will start to initiate. we obviously are aware of the intention that in terms of people and skills and employment, it's likely that will be not the first focus area of UKSPF, but for ABRI that doesn't mean we stop everything. We've got our own investment into communities, our own employment programme. For us, it is all about continuing to deliver that. So, you know, in terms of potentially that gap, critical to us in terms of our focus area over the next 2 years will be continue to be that partnership and relationship that we can have. And I think that is about joining up with organisations, awareness of what we're delivering, what others are delivering, how they complement each other, and understanding that sort of local picture to help build as we see the perspectives for UKSPF develop. I also think it's really important in terms of that sort of, as we develop partnerships and relationships around intelligence sharing. So as I mentioned, as a housing association, you know, we can offer very interesting insights to what we're seeing, and particularly because obviously my area, I've got housing and communities, what we see might play out with our customers in terms of vulnerabilities and our tenancy sustainment services, how that then supports and we look at focusing our employment support. So that's something we're thinking about internally as I look at joining up my services internally as well as externally to ensure that we're sharing that intelligence that comes through. I also think it's really important as we share that intelligence in local areas about what we're delivering, what we're seeing, that we also think about this and map it from the customer journey. So I do feel that over the next 2 years, that intelligence sharing and identifying the hotspots, whether that's specific areas or that specific sort of vulnerabilities or types of groups of customer, I think that to me is an exciting opportunity that we must step into and really think about, you know, how do we evolve that. And I think the other key aspect here is understanding those local areas from a labour market perspective and those employers. We as an employer, we have some 1,600 staff. We like to reflect the communities that we work in. We will be going through significant programs in terms of retrofit and our journey to zero carbon, which will mean our skill landscape will change for quite a predominant amount of our frontline facing colleagues. So, you know, as both an employer in a local labour market that's facing a skills shift and understanding that and being able to share that information, but also being in that position where we're providing support and services, I think our role with employers is going to be critical over the next 2 years to really understand those local labour markets and ensure that we're preparing people and looking at how we can use UKSPF to really level up and respond to what a local area looks like. So that's my reflections from ABRI. I'm hoping I kept that to about 5 minutes, but happy to take some questions at the end. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Michelle. We're going to go through all 3 speakers before we come to questions. I can see there's quite a few coming up already. Just to reinforce what you said, I think intelligence sharing is going to be really important. My worry is a lot of this seems to be top down, and I'm not sure that central government has realised just how much work is needed locally to actually develop partnerships, link together, look at best practice and share it. And I think we're probably going to have to get together to do that ourselves for part of the time. So we're now moving across to Leah Davis. I hope I've got your first name right.
Yeah.
Apologies. Good. Head of Policy and External Affairs. The brief CV that you've given looks pretty impressive. It's criminal justice, homelessness, place-based approaches, and a whole range of environmental stuff. So I'm looking forward to what you're going to talk to us about today.
Oh, thank you, Andy, and thanks everyone for having me here today. As Andy mentioned, I'm Head of Policy and External Affairs at MPC, and MPC is a think tank and consultancy, and we work with charities who are trying to create social change or delivering services for different communities and people across the UK. And what we try to do is help them to improve their impact on those people and on those communities. And we do that through providing support on how to design programs and how to use data and information to understand what actually works and doesn't and evaluate them well. We also provide advice and support on if you want to use kind of innovative new technologies to make your services more effective. And my role is all about trying to help shape and influence the policy environment so that charities have an operating environment where they can be most effective. And that's why for the past year, we've been really focused on trying to track what government's doing on levelling up, mainly because charities are often working, supporting people in those very communities that government is trying to level up. So they're really quite an important partner. And like Michelle says, have really important intelligence and information that could be really important for the levelling up agenda. Now, I'm not going to spend ages on what we've heard in terms of learning on the Community Renewal Fund. I think there is, I guess, sort of three main things that we're hearing back from people. One is that they found it hard to have that competitive process between local authorities. A lot of people have spent quite a lot of time on bids that haven't gone anywhere, and they felt quite frustrated by that. The second thing we've heard back is that although Michelle was saying, you know, short timeframes can be quite helpful to kind of catalyse action, some of the smaller organisations just haven't got the capacity to be able to respond that quickly, so they feel they've missed out on funding. And I guess the third thing was, it was a short round of funding, it was a year. It means sustainable programmes are quite hard to do unless you have kind of bigger ones that you can fit them into. So those are the three main things that we were hearing back from people. But what I was going to do was just talk a bit more about what that means for the UK Shared Prosperity Fund and levelling up more generally. And I think I've got three main points I want to make. The first one is about levelling up more generally. At MPC, we've been looking at how much of the targeted levelling up funds are going into various things. And the targeted ones, we mean the Community Renewal Fund, the Levelling Up Fund, the Community Ownership Fund, and the Towns Fund in England. And we found that of all the funds that have been allocated so far, as little as 2% of those funds are invested in people. The rest of it is being invested in hard infrastructure in places. Now that matters, we think, because firstly, I think history has shown us that if you invest only in infrastructure, which by the way, we think is really important. You know, if you live in the north and you've got bad transport links, you probably do want investment in hard infrastructure. It's going to be quite important for your area to be levelled up. But we also know you've got to invest in people, because otherwise they can't access the opportunities that you're creating through that hard infrastructure. But it also matters because we did representative polling across people across the UK last year and asked them, what would you expect to see in an area that had been levelled up? And the three top issues that they told us were all social ones. They were reduced poverty, reduced crime, and reduced homelessness. The rest of the funding, the rest of the interventions that were hard infrastructure, like improved high streets or transport links, came much further down. So it matters that you invest in people, because that's what people are expecting government to do. And if they don't do it, I think the levelling up agenda is likely to fail. Moving on to my second point, which is more about the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. Now that fund was there, and that could help to address some of that imbalance, because historically, particularly through the European Social Fund, which it was partly replacing, a lot of that funding was invested into people. I think there are some good things that we think we're seeing through the UK Shared Prosperity Fund through that pre-launch guidance that Andy mentioned. So one of them is that, one, it isn't the criteria you can invest in people and people far from the labour market. So that's really great. The second thing was that the allocations aren't going to be competitive nationally, so they're going to be allocated to local authorities. So at least stops that national competition, if not stopping, obviously, competition at the more local level. And the third area, I think, was that as part of the UKSPF, local authorities are going to have to produce implementation plans which explain how the UKSPF funding is going to work with other levelling up funding coming into their local authority. And that plan has to show how it will meet local needs. And it should include local partners as well. So if you are working in a local authority delivering these programmes, I would be calling them up and saying, right, you've got to do these implementation plans. We're a partner and we want to help you shape what that is. So I think there are some doors that might be opening for that. So I think those are good things about the UKSPF. Sadly, and I think it's already mentioned, the challenges that we've got with the UKSPF is that there's this gap in funding. So if you are delivering some of the skills programmes all the programs that are kind of helping people far from the labour market, it looks like you're not going to be able to access that for 2 years. Now, as Michelle mentioned, if you already have those programs and you can add this funding in, that's okay. But if you're relying upon that funding, which I know some organisations are, you're going to really struggle for the next 2 years, I think. And that although there's funding through the UKSPF for things like the Multiply programme, that's not the same as some of the programmes that are far from the labour market. So I think I was asked to give kind of 2 things for my wish list for the UKSPF. So I've got 2. The first one is just, I'd like to see government invest more in people and not just in places, because I think it's going to fail unless it does that. But the second one is, I think that the most kind of important and urgent one is really stopping that gap in funding. Now, local authorities can, in theory, say, well, we've seen a gap in provision, so we can make the case for why we keep funding this. But it's going to be really hard for local authorities to balance this against all the other competing priorities under the UKSPF and to make the case for why they should fund this and not something else. So I think having something which government says, actually, we're just going to allow local authorities to use their kind of discretion to fund those programmes from this year, I think it's going to be really important to make sure that the UKSPF actually delivers what it needs to deliver, and the levelling up agenda does more widely too. Thanks.
Thanks, Leah. I think you're right on that. To me, this has all been very top down without enough consultation. And I'm astonished that our government officials have not noticed there's going to be a gap in this sort of funding. And somewhere or other, we need to explain it, whether that's through local authorities or whether central government will change their mind on what they've done. So it's a real pity. We've got to look at that rather than looking at the whole locally based activities that we've got. I now want to move across to Heather Warrington, a strong and active colleague on the overall committee or board for ESF and ERDF, from the West Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority, and according to the paper I've got, passionate about Yorkshire. So over to you, Heather.
Thank you, and I'm going to go off piste. I'm not going to do the presentation that I planned on doing because, well, 1, I think we're way behind time, and 2, based on the conversation so far, I think I'm just going to talk to you about a few things. So yeah, I'm Heather Waddington. I have worked with European funding a little bit like Andy for over 30 years, and I am responsible for UK Community Renewal Fund. I'm also the lead policy manager for UK Shared Prosperity Fund in our Mayoral Combined Authority, and I am losing sleep already about the work that's ahead to put our investment plans, not implementation plans, investment plans together for the summer. So we have a very, very tall order, and I did brief locally to say be careful what you wish for. Yes, I would start by saying it's extremely positive in terms of the overall direction of SPF, but I do agree with everything that's been said before. So I was asked in particular to bring some of, and again, just building on what Leah said about UK Community Renewal Fund, and I think this is more than well rehearsed. What I would say to you is we have taken the learning from UK Community Renewal Fund, and we have worked with government following the learning. And whilst we looked at it from a West Yorkshire perspective, those of you who don't know me, I sit on quite a number of national boards. I've also been part of what we call a sprint task force, very privileged position, one of only 5 representatives across England, working with the local government association to work with government on the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. I'm not saying I'm responsible or guilty of where we've got to. However, we are constantly trying to influence and shape the direction of travel. For example, we did see the pre-launch guidance before it came out, and we did give our opinions and views to the direction of travel. But in terms of UK Community Renewal Fund, you know, there was a lot to learn, and I'm not convinced that government have listened to some of the things that we talked about. So obviously, you know, this lead authority role. And so whilst you say local authorities, I think actually we do need to talk about the lead authority role rather than local authorities, because you know, I'm leading UK Shared Prosperity Fund in West Yorkshire, but we are not a local authority. We are a mayoral combined authority. So I think just the language is interesting, actually, that it is a lead authority role, and it's there at the respective level of local government. And I think it's really important to make that point, because for areas like ourselves, we have been lobbying long and hard for devolution as part of our wider devolution deal of the funding. However, for smaller district councils, this is not necessarily welcome, because there are issues, like you say, about capacity and capability, and the timing alone, again, if what we believe is an end of June, end of July submission for the investment plans, so one for SPF, one for multiply, that is a really tall order, even for an MCA like ourselves that are you know, well stocked in terms of staff. We have policy leads in all areas, we have a delivery, we have an implementation team. That is still a massive ask for a mayoral combined authority for ourselves. So I think just the language on lead authority. So yeah, I think in terms of CRF, some of the things that we talked about, you know, I think all of it was done in terms of very unhelpful government guidelines, and we did repeatedly feed that back, that the government guidelines were not helpful. I am slightly worried that the detailed prospectus in itself might not be as helpful as we would hope it's going to be. As I say, I'm hoping that I get one last push myself to try and influence that before it's actually in the public domain. But it's going to be really important that we are given a clear steer from the top, but we are absolutely given the flexibility and the autonomy to do what's needed at a local area, whatever is fit for the local area. So, you know, that is not what we had under UK Community Renewal Fund. It was a little bit of a pretending that we'd got a halfway house. We really didn't have that. I agree totally, the time limited one-off fund, the impact is totally questionable. I have 6 projects that are running in our area. They are all, even though they were set to go, they are all going to be struggling to get to the end of June. There is a rumour going around that government may extend the delivery time frame for CRF, also probably because of the slight delays in SPF. So that'll be interesting. That's probably a rumour that I'm sharing today, which some of you will not have heard about. So it is only a rumour that I've heard, not necessarily from a very good source. So, but it will be interesting if they do realise that actually you can deliver very little in, you know, 4 or 5 months that really makes any learning viable to take forward into SPF. And I think I would just relate that back to SPF again. You know, we've only got a 3-year so far commitment based on the current government. That's not what we wanted. You know, 7 to 10 year planning period for ESIF. You know, we haven't got where we wanted to be. And yes, there are conversations already taking place with Treasury about what comes in 25, 26, but that is all pending, you know, the current government staying where they are. As I said, I'm trying to go off a little bit off pace because I'm trying to pick up the key things. I think what we really did welcome on CRF was this test bed around cross-thematic integrated projects, and that was extremely welcome. And we remain optimistic that we can do exactly that under SPF. Even though there is the 3 pillars, we are not constrained by the 3 pillars, is what we've been told, and that will not be in the guidance, so that it will be down to local areas. What I would say very quickly, just pulling out a couple of extra things, is I think this is where the challenge is to partners like yourself, is that, you know, there are 250 plus lead authorities now across the England programme. That in itself really dictates to me that they are looking for investment plans by the summer, because they have to approve those investment plans, and that's another 250 or so, possibly for multiply, by the autumn to unlock the money to a local level. So we wouldn't be able to even start thinking about delivery starting until the autumn. What I would say in West Yorkshire, and this is very unique to West Yorkshire, but I think this is where, you know, we've got a slightly different argument, is one of the things that's been keeping me quiet over the last couple of years waiting for SPF is that I was tasked with designing our single investment fund and writing our West Yorkshire investment strategy, which is part of our devolution deal. And that's in place now. So we actually don't really want to operate SPF as a fund. We want to see it as an additional resource to our local area to help us deliver what we are aiming to achieve. So we start from the premise, these are all the things that we want to invest in over a particular time frame, and then we need the money. And so we pull the money in from different sources to help us achieve what we want to achieve. Now, don't get me wrong, I have also briefed internally this only in the last week to say there is a little bit of a reality check in here, that we may not be allowed to have the flexibility that we need to be able to do that. But in terms of our asks, we absolutely want to just see it as an additional source. So the old single pot kind of principle where you just bring in the resources to help you deliver what you want to do. So therefore our ask is continually that we need the flexibility to be able to realise our economic ambitions, if they are to be realised. The second thing I would say is I do agree personally on effective engagement strategy, and that is something we are discussing internally already. It's how we bring in and engage a wide range of partners. I think that's not easy because of the positioning of some areas about where they want to be, but we are keen to work with partners, and we are already engaging through our comms, and we'll be holding a webinar in a couple of weeks' time for our partners so that we can bring them up to speed and try to tell them what our direction of travel is, because the time is against us. So I think on that basis, it's not quite what I was going to do, but I think it's, you know, kind of pulling out the key things. And the last thing is the employment and skills stuff. Again, I think we can't get away from, I think it is disappointing, but I think we do have to remember there is a whole host of European Social Fund projects running in most areas, not every area, right through to December 2023. So it is again about making the best use of resources. In some areas, that's not the case. In our area, I have to say we have a plethora of projects still running. So we're quite fortunate, but I do appreciate that's not the same across the country. So I'm going to maybe leave it as that, and maybe, Andy, if you want to go to questions.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, I think there's quite an issue about the combined authorities and then the district councils, and how on earth all of that can be tackled. I have zero confidence in how they're going to be able to appraise all the plans in a short time, given our experience of appraisals over the last, I don't know how many years, but hopefully they'll push most of the plans through. We've got not much time and got a lot of questions that have come up. I'm not sure we can cover all of them at the moment. I mean, the first and biggest questions, which we've tried, everyone's referred to, is this gap until April 2024, with European money running out before that. Other than keep lobbying, I'm not sure if there's any particular answer to that. My guess about Community Renewal Fund being extended, I would have said that it's not going to happen, but Heather's ahead of me on this. But I'm not sure it's going to make an enormous amount of difference. If you get a few months extra funding, then essentially that's taking you away from long-term planning. I come from third sector very much, and I think this is something, certainly the government has done what they're going to do on putting this together. It's then going to be up to local authorities to start putting a plan together. But I think we all need to work with our relevant local authorities to come up with something which is going to make a big difference locally. I don't think we're going to get a lot of support on that. There is talk about some technical assistance, capacity building funding. But to me, it's a question of getting together locally, using whatever we've got. I note from some of the questions that that's difficult in some areas, but this is one opportunity to actually get together and come up with something over the next few years. So has anyone got any comments about how we can tackle the delays in the people side of it, or have we covered that sufficiently?
Andy, I just wanted to comment on the kind of, and sort of Heather's point about that engagement now, because I think in terms of sort of the investment plans and starting to really understand and map that provision and understand where it all is, this is about talking, this is about engagement, and you know, every area works slightly differently. I could see some comments in the chat about what's, you know, has anyone got any ideas or best practice on that? I can give you some examples from Abri. You know, we've gone out in terms of our stakeholder engagement and just made sure that, you know, our customers at the heart of that in terms of shaping our plans and shaping what we've been doing in terms of our community investment plans and our priorities and areas. But then ultimately then going back to our stakeholders, you know, be it local authorities, third sector partners, and going and communicating and talking about what we're doing, and that we want to be a partner. We want to partner. We want to be a partner of choice. You know, we are in a position that we can provide grant funding as well. So we do a mixture of delivery. So I think there's something here around getting that engagement. And I would say probably, you know, so for hints for people on how you do that, I think you just have to go out there and talk about it and get in as many forums as you can. You know, we're lucky, I've got a very good, strong comms team that help us position this. But ultimately, you know, my teams on the ground are talking and joining up at that local level. And then we ensure at all levels of our stakeholder engagement that we're just reiterating these key messages. So I think this engagement now is absolutely key to map what things look like.
Anyone else want to comment?
Yeah, I was going to just add on to that. I think one of the things that's mentioned in the chat was around, you know, capacity and what relationships like with your, as Heather quite rightly corrected, lead authority. I would say that, you know, that there's lots of membership bodies and infrastructure bodies out there as well, and you know, if you're not able to do it, you haven't got those relationships, you quite frankly just don't have the capacity, speak to them, because that they can help to do that for you. And I think the more people that are making voices at all different levels, whether that's, you know, at your lead authority level or the national level, I think that would be helpful. But I guess it would be great to get Heather's view on whether or not she feels that would be useful as well, as a person who's, you know, under that pressure to create an investment plan in quite a short time frame. I guess what's the best way for people to feed in? I guess your view would be really helpful too.
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult. I mean, I have a lot of reach into many of the areas across the country because of the national work that I do. So, you know, if people want to drop me a line in terms of, you know, anybody to recommend to speak in a particular area, I will offer that to help you know, you speak to people. I don't know everybody, but I would say most of this will probably sit in economic development areas, in local councils, in MCAs. I think you could probably just send something to the inbox in MCAs, combined authorities, and it will find the right person. They're not that big an organisation, so I'm sure you could find the right person who will be able to you know, add you into some kind of mailing database. Can I just very quickly, Andy, though, just pick up on the learning from CRF? I mean, you know, I am one of the cynics and the skeptics about the value of CRF. Right? I think there's a couple of things. I think, to be fair to ministers, they did very early doors say that a lot of the learning would be process driven ahead of SPF. So they were testing the lead authority principle, the kind of giving local areas more autonomy, etc. And they were testing some of that. And I think some of that learning has gone forward into SPF so far. Not all of it, but some of it. And overall, I think the direction of travel, as I say, on SPF is welcome if the investment prospectus doesn't then go back and then tie us down as a lead authority to not be able to do what we want to do. I think the only thing then is it's the policy and development learning that then we will definitely in West Yorkshire. I can only speak for West Yorkshire. Well, no, I will speak a little bit wide because of my networks. I know that they are doing the same. Is that yeah, I think we definitely would really welcome an extension, even if it's only by a couple of months, to allow projects to deliver and be evaluated. Because you might remember that CRF, one of the mandations was that external evaluation is in there. I think it's not going to really say much if they have to also complete all that by the end of June. But we have got 6 very nice projects in our area. And I am hopeful that there are some key nuggets. Interesting, there's a retrofit housing hub one, and we are hopeful that some of that testing in very small, low, low super output areas will allow us to think about what that looks like in the future. So I come back to how we looked at it in West Yorkshire, is that our policy and development is the whole. We try not to think about it in terms of funds. So what does our housing pipeline look like? What does our housing need look like? What does it look like in that area, to that court, to that? So we are hoping that some of that learning will go into the policy development and we will take that forward into the future. So I think we've got to be careful not to be too short-sighted about some of the learning from CRF. I get what you're all saying, I am there as well, but we are definitely going to try and make the most of it, and as we take future policy work forward. Okay, we're beginning to run out of time. A sort of final question I'm going to ask is, what have we actually learned so far from Community Renewal Fund? Is that being fed back into the process, or was it too short notice and too difficult? I think we're at the point where we can't rely on the local authorities to do everything. I say local authorities generally, combined authorities, district councils and so on. They're not going to be able to do everything themselves. They've had massive funding cuts over the years. I think it's going to be a question of all of us working together to come up with something which is going to be effective and locally based. Part of that is actually seeing how we can share information between each other and look at what works and so on. I'm not sure we've got any good mechanisms set up within Shared Prosperity Fund to do that. I mean, there was a promise there'd be money from the Community Renewal Fund to look at good practice and to feed it back in. As far as I'm aware, they've not released that as of yet, and we're heading towards Community Renewal Fund. If I've got that wrong, Heather, well, the only thing I would say to you, Andy, is that amount of money that's not being allocated is going to come back out to lead authorities to allow them to progress the work on SPF, is what I've been told.
Good. I was hoping it would have come out a bit earlier, but if it's still there, then that's a good point. My understanding on most of this is up to all of us to work together, and it's not a question of hanging around. We've got the document that gives a lot of information for the pre-launch guidance. So it's up to those of you who are not within the local government to actually start pestering your various officials and say, look, we can help out with this. We've got examples of what works. We think there are ways of linking the different funds together to do things, and to actually start sitting down now and doing a draft plan. So I think we've got about a minute or so left. I've forgotten what question I'd asked the rest of you to start with. Yeah, it's what have we learned that we've been able to feed in from the Community Renewal Fund? Are there any changes we want to make with Shared Prosperity Fund? Is that too broad brush?
I think I don't mind having a go at answering. I think it's too, given the timescales of it in terms of what we have learned, it's really difficult to say. I would echo what Heather says around sort of, from a policy perspective and from lead authorities, some of this can be fed in. I think some of the paperwork isn't as bad, from what I hear. So that's a real plus side. But I think it is too early to say. I think I just urge around, this is about sharing knowledge now, and not to wait, and to go off and engage and have those conversations. And if anything, CRF, if we can learn from that, I think we have seen some of those local conversations from an average from our experience of it, which has been good.
We've not mentioned Multiply. At the moment, we know the name and the amount of money. I'm looking at Heather here because she seems to be ahead of the rest of us. But it seems there's going to be an online component which DFE will run, and then there'll be something which will go out locally. Quite how that operates or when we're going to get information, I mean, we've been told in due course, but I understand spring, that's between now and August. But in due course, I'm not sure.
No, I mean, Multiply's working at speed. It's, we're every couple of weeks as an MCA, we're being invited to a roundtable with DFE. Multiply, the government are, because it's ministerially led as well around adult, low levels of adult numeracy. Multiply is really ramping up now in terms of speed. We have been told the allocations will be out next month. So if the allocations are out for Multiply, that probably on Thursday will be out for SPF. So out of the money that's been announced, there will be about 430 million left for delivery, which will be split, but it will be dictated to by the methodology for the wider SPF. But DFE are working at speed to what that looks like. So far, I would say we had a meeting with the minister about 2 weeks ago. I would say the rhetoric is spot on. Flexibility, you tell us what you need in your area and we will let you do that. Sounds wonderful, doesn't it? It's the type of thing we've been lobbying for a long time. I'm not totally convinced yet because I've just been invited to another meeting next week where they're going to talk about the metrics for the fund. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting. We know that we will be required to put an investment plan separate to the wider SPF. I've tried to push back on that one to say why two, why not one, but that multiplies a separate annex. But apparently the minister does not want to lose the thread. Or the focus, should I say, of what Multiply is about. But we've been told it'll be a very light touch investment plan as opposed to the wider full SPF plan, but it's motoring alongside. So yeah, I think the allocations will be out. I won't be surprised if the prospectus is out before the pre-election period, known as PERDA, or PERDA, known as now pre-election period. If not, I think it will be April. They need to put the allocations out and they need to give us the investment prospectuses if they want us to turn all of this around for the end of June, the end of July.
That sounds really positive. And Multiply should be able to start straight away rather than the 2-year wait for the people stuff. Right, we're just about time to finish. I'm sorry we haven't properly covered all the various questions that have come up. I think we've given a quick overview of where we're up to with Community Renewal Fund and the Shared Prosperity Fund. And for me, the message is we've all got to find out how it will affect us locally and work together to deliver something and try and make sure that we can, as they say in the levelling up, if we can measure locally what is going on and compare notes across the country to see what's working and what doesn't. So I'm going to say goodbye to you all now. Thanks for the speakers. Thanks for all the questions. And let's get moving on the Shared Prosperity Fund. Thank you.